Chris Morgan walked down a long tunnel for several minutes. It kept getting wider, expanding into a huge cave, and then narrowing back to the size of a ventilation pipe. At some point, the man felt that he would never be able to find his way out of that labyrinth. But then he saw a bright light appear ahead. It blinded Chris briefly and made him close his eyes. At the same time, the man could hear a strange, distorted voice causing the man severe pain. "Doctor, could you help me? What are the chances that Chris could come out of this coma in the near future? Maybe I should get a lawyer to get all the paperwork in order in case of his death? As we all know, that's not easy and takes a lot of time." Chris heard through the haze in his brain. It's still too early to make any predictions. Such injuries require time and complex treatment. A pleasant female voice answered. What are they talking about? What coma? Chris thought, alarmed. At first, it seemed to him that it was just a nightmare, and that this strange vision would disappear as soon as he opened his eyes. But then, Chris felt a severe headache and realized that this wasn't a dream at all, but a terrifying reality. Suddenly, the man remembered everything. How he was on his way to a business meeting, and how his car skidded on the road, wet from the rain. Then came a strong blow and darkness which filled his mind. And now, lying in the intensive care unit, he was desperately trying to come to his senses. As if to confirm this theory, Chris heard the characteristic sound of the life support machines, which he had repeatedly seen on TV. First, Chris got his hearing back, and now he could distinguish the voices of the women in his hospital room. One of them belonged to Jennifer, who was his legal spouse. The voice of the second woman was unfamiliar to Chris, and therefore the businessman assumed that she was the ICU doctor. In the meantime, the dialogue between the two women was over, and lying in his bed, the patient distinctly heard the sound of the door closing. Well, finally, what an idiot. Does she really hope that this lifeless vegetable will come back to his senses? Jennifer said, completely disregarding her husband in the bed next to her. Chris felt betrayed. He would have gladly disappeared off the face of the earth at that moment, if he only could. What's going on? Why is she talking about me like that? What's happening? Thoughts rushed through the young businessman's mind. Gathering all his strength, Chris tried his best to open his eyes in order to see Jennifer's face at that moment. Unfortunately, doing that turned out to be much more difficult than the young businessman expected. Eventually, Chris managed to slightly open his eyes, just enough to see Jennifer take her phone out of her purse, about to make a call. The young businessman remembered that he gave this phone to his wife for her birthday, and it cost him dearly. Finally, Jennifer found the number she wanted to call, and the ICU soon got filled with the characteristic beeping sounds. "Hello, dear. How are you? Do you miss me? Please be patient. It won't be long. I'll just go see a lawyer. I need to know everything about my rights to my husband's property. It's unlikely that he'll ever wake up. This stupid doctor doesn't know anything. It feels like she's trying to read the future in some coffee cup. Bribe her? Of course I tried. She rejected my offer and then went on about the Hippocratic Oath. Okay, just wait for me. I'll be there soon. Love you," Jennifer said, pressing her phone to her ear. Listening to his wife's conversation, Chris bit his lip until it bled. Chris was raging, and his rage was ready to burst out at any second. On the other hand, he was well aware that he shouldn't rush into anything, especially into letting his wife know that he regained consciousness. Suppressing his inner anger, the young businessman closed his eyes and pretended that he was still in a coma. "Well, goodbye, hubby. I hope to never see you again." Jennifer said goodbye, smiling. Only when the clatter of her heels died down in the hallway did Chris breathe a sigh of relief. Well, finally, I was already thinking that this torture would last forever, the young businessman thought, drenched in sweat. At that moment, the on-call nurse came into his room and immediately noticed that his eyes were open. But before the woman had time to rejoice at Chris's progress, the man gathered his strength and managed to utter, "Don't tell my wife. Call the doctor." The nurse looked at the patient in surprise and then nodded, hurrying off to the staff room. Soon, a pleasant woman of about 30 years came into the room. She was smiling as she made notes in the patient's chart. Turning to Chris, she said, "My name is Rachel Thomas. How are you feeling? Could you rate your condition on a scale of 1 to 10 for me, please?" Chris closed his eyes for a moment and then whispered softly, "Thank you, ma'am. I'm already feeling much better. I think I'm at a solid 7. But I have one request for you. Don't tell my wife that I come to my senses, please." Rachel gave the patient a questioning look and frowned, saying, "Yes, of course. I get it. I will do as you ask. I got the feeling that your wife, how do I put it mildly, is a bit out of touch with reality. Believe it or not, she actually offered me a bribe so that I wouldn't treat you properly." Hearing the doctor's reply, Chris smiled gratefully. Despite the fact that the man was still very weak, his state of mind improved remarkably. Unbeknownst to himself, the young businessman fell asleep again, dreaming about his past. Chris grew up in a poor family and was used to hard work from an early age. The boy didn't have a father, and in order to help his mother provide for the family, he had to grow up very early. After school, Chris went to the car wash or helped the janitor clean the city park. The boy got paid very little for his work, but at that time, it seemed like a fortune to him. After graduating from school, Chris went to college, having chosen to study economics. From the very first days of college, the professors couldn't help but note the outstanding talent and hard work of the young man, who wanted to succeed in life more than anything else. Chris had to go through a lot to make his dream come true. At first, he took the position of an intern in a small company, then the position of a senior manager of the sales department, and a while later, he got the position of a general director. For someone who's not a part of the business world, climbing the career ladder might seem boring and unimportant. But for all of Chris's friends and acquaintances, his rapid ascent to the company's top management position seemed like something truly fascinating and worthy of respect. The young man met Jennifer when he'd already achieved success in the business world. The beautiful woman fascinated Chris from the very first minutes of their encounter. Despite his social status, Chris remained a kind and slightly naive young man. Their passionate romance ended in a wedding that surprised Chris's friends and acquaintances with its magnitude and luxury. Unfortunately, the young people only lived together for 2 years before the car accident. And now, lying in the hospital bed, Chris got to see with his own eyes that his wife was pretending to be someone else all those years and was actually a completely different person. Realizing that he had no time to waste, the man asked the nurse to help him get out of bed. "But it's too early for you to try and get up. After all, they're only now getting ready to transfer you out of the ICU," the young nurse whispered uncertainly. "You have to understand, I need to get home. At least for half an hour. I can pay you for it. Just please help me," Chris pleaded. The nurse sighed sadly and opened the locker to take out his clothes. "Here, take this. Your wife brought them in. And you don't need to pay me, I get it." The woman nodded, helping the patient stand up. Chris immediately started seeing double, but he got his bearings a minute later and started feeling less dizzy. He even managed to take a few steps around the room. "Well, looks like I'm as good as new," the man joked, putting on his clothes. Soon, he was already walking down the hallway, catching the surprised glances of the medical staff. Fortunately, Chris managed to get by Rachel Thompson, who was the attending and would have definitely made him get back into bed. In order to get home as soon as possible, Chris had to get a taxi. The drive took a few minutes, and when the man opened the front door to his penthouse, he literally froze from what he saw. The fact was that some stranger was walking around the living room, looking like he owned the place. "Oh, you're probably the designer? Come on in. Hurry up. We're already tired of waiting for you. We have a lot of work to do, and you can't even get here on time," the stranger said, sounding irritated. "No, not a designer. Not even close. I actually own this place. Chris said in an icy tone. At that moment, Jennifer came into the room and almost fainted at the sight of her husband, alive and well. "But you should have died. I saw it with my own eyes," the woman whispered. "Well, as you can see, I'm alive, and I'm not going to die. As for you, I suggest that you get out of my home right this moment, and don't forget your lover. Otherwise, I'm going to call the police," Chris said, not even trying to hide his contempt. Jennifer tried to say something, but when she saw the eyes of her soon-to-be ex-husband, she silently started packing her things. Within half an hour, the young woman and her lover left Chris's apartment. The businessman sank wearily into a chair and closed his eyes. Being on his feet for so long, so soon after the accident, was very hard for Chris, so he virtually had no strength left. The man didn't even realize when he lost consciousness and plunged into impenetrable darkness. Chris didn't even wake up when the door of his apartment flung open and Rachel Thompson came in with the resuscitation team. The young businessman only came to his senses the next morning. The first person he saw was Rachel, standing next to his bed. "So you finally woke up. Was it worth the risk? If I knew what you were up to, I would have never let you do it. I think I should have let your wife know about it. You could have died," the doctor said, sounding very concerned. "I'm sorry, I was too emotional to think straight. Of course I shouldn't have done it. I didn't mean to cause trouble for you or the on-call nurse," Chris answered, lowering his eyes guiltily. From the very moment he met Rachel, he felt that she was a warm and kind woman. He might have been wrong, but he couldn't help but hope that they would become friends, or maybe even have a romantic relationship. 3 weeks later, Chris was discharged from the hospital and got to go home, holding the hand of Rachel Thompson. At the sight of this touching scene, none of the employees of the medical institution could hold back their smiles. Having become friends, Rachel and Chris felt a rather strong mutual attraction, which only got stronger with each passing day. When he was still at the hospital, Chris called the family lawyer and filed for divorce. Even though Jennifer took him to court, she still ended up getting nothing. Having started a new life with the woman he loved, Chris was 100% sure that this time he made the right choice. And thus, he was confident that he wouldn't have to feel betrayed ever again, since there was no place for betrayal in a strong and loving family.